Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing our study of the suffering servant passage, and we're coming to the close of that section where um, the prophet is saying, wake up to the people, telling them that God has come to rescue them. And God Himself is going to speak to the people today. Yahweh Himself is going to speak to them. They've been reminded that they were in their captivity, not because the Babylonians were superior, but because of their own sin. They've been reminded that God is the only God. God is the creator of the universe, and God clearly can deliver them. They've been reminded that there's no one else. There's no one among them to be their leader, only God. And we've also mentioned that the promises that were made to God's people, we have to think in terms of God's covenant people spiritually, not as a cultural entity, an ethnic entity, or a political entity, but as a spiritual entity. We made that clear. There's no way these promises that were made at the end of 51 and 52 can be kept. I mean, they weren't kept if we think of it in terms of an ethnic group, a cultural entity, a nation, a city state. But if we think in terms of God's covenant people and God having an unsevered covenant with His covenant people from now on, that actually and absolutely is what happened. And so let's keep that in mind when we read verses 3 through 6, because it's the only way verses 3 through 6 are going to make sense. For thus says Yahweh, you were sold for nothing, and you will be redeemed without money. For thus says the Lord God, my people went at first into Egypt to reside there. Then the Assyrian oppressed them without cause. Now, therefore, what do I have here, declares the Lord, seeing that my people have been taken away, speaking of Babylonian captivity, without cause. Again, the Lord declares, those who rule over them howl, and my name is continually blasphemed all day long. Therefore, my people shall know my name. Therefore, in that day, I am the one who is speaking. Here I am. Okay. And so with the words, here I am, we have God arriving. And then we go into the how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news. And we're getting into the heart of the promise of the suffering Messiah. But anyway, the suffering servant. But anyway, God has mentioned their 3 enslavements. And it's interesting that He's included the northern kingdom as well. That he understands that He has not written them off. They're not just a footnote in history, although they did not have a return the way the southern kingdom did. They first went to Egypt. They went to Egypt for to save themselves. I sent Joseph ahead of them, but their enslavement, they were enslaved there. Um, and then he says they went into Assyrian captivity and then Babylonian captivity for no reason. Now, you and I might ask ourselves, what do you mean for no reason? You've made it clear in every prophet who's ever written there were perfect reasons why they went into captivity. They went into captivity because of their sin. But if we understand it a different way, if God is saying this was not necessary, it didn't have to be this way. Assyria did not have to take you into captivity. Babylon did not have to take you into captivity. You made it necessary. Then it makes sense. It makes absolute sense if we read it that way. And an added result of this is that the nations who take them into captivity for a brief period of time, until God humbles them and removes them from the world stage, crow about their victory um, and blaspheme God. But that's all temporary. God says, I'm going to be there. You're going to know my name. And I'm going to say in that day, I am here. And that's what He looks forward to in verse 6. Okay. We have to read this passage very carefully. It will be easy for us to misapply. And once you start misapplying something, it unravels. Back in chapter 51, we talked about how the prophet himself was describing God's act of creation in Babylonian terms. And those Babylonian terms still had a kernel of truth in them, but they had been misshapen and warped over the years into something different. And then God, in the ensuing passage, gives a clear description, a precise description of what he did in creation. Once you start unraveling a truth, then the thread will unravel everything else. And if we apply these promises to an ethnicity, a cultural entity, a city-state, a nation, then everything else there's so much wrong is going to come from it. He's talking to his covenant people. When Isaiah was writing, his covenant people were the Jews. But as God has made clear already in this passage, there's going to come a day when all humans can participate in the covenant. And it is this relationship and this salvation that he's talking about in this passage. Okay, we'll pick up with that very famous passage, How Beautiful Are the Feet, next time. Thank you for joining me for 5 Good Minutes with the Word.